good evening, everyone. Looks like we are live on both Instagram and Facebook this month. I apologize for technical difficulties in previous attempts past month or so, as it's a little difficult dealing with technology when you live in semi-remote rural Alaska. I am on the road system here in Nenana, but internet is not necessarily what folks in Anchorage or Fairbanks would understand to be internet here. So anyway, good to see a lot of folks joining in. Boy, a lot of folks already joining in on both Instagram and Facebook tonight. So I encourage you, if you do have a question, to go ahead and type it in. I'll do my best to answer those as we go along this evening. I do have a long list of things I want to update you on. It seems that we are living in very interesting times. Is it the Chinese proverb that says, or curse, or may you live in interesting times? I think we are living in interesting times. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those things. I'm not going to get too deep into politics, but we'll see where we go. So had a question on Instagram right quick. How's the weather there today? Well, it was a beautiful day here in Nenana. Sun was shining bright. Sunrise and sunset was incredible. Obviously the sun was not above the horizon very long, but we are pretty excited. We're gaining 5 minutes and 30 seconds or so of daylight every day right now, and it makes us feel better about the temperatures. Actually, we were above zero today. This morning, I think I saw 28 degrees above zero Fahrenheit. And I know we got a lot of folks internationally that are watching, and so yeah, that is Fahrenheit, not Celsius, but it's supposed to be below zero here in the next day or so. So anyway, you see the airplane behind me there. I've got a 185, a friend of mine's on wheel skis, and then our mall behind me on straight skis, waiting to go out and enjoy the winter here in the next day or so. So let's get to my long list here. So I think we've had enough time for folks to join. Have you seen this? The NTSB advisory talking about Continental oil cooler adapters. If you fly behind a Continental engine, you probably are aware that Continental oil filter adapters are problematic. They leak. And there actually has been several accidents and even some fatalities that the NTSB has contributed as a causal, or at least a contributing factor. The oil filter adapter, and specifically the gasket at the bottom of that adapter, is failing. So looks like folks are having a little bit of trouble hearing on a couple of places here. I'll do my best to speak up. And again, trying to use multiple forms of technology here. Maybe if I move that stand out of the way just a little bit, that may increase the ability for the microphone to pick me up. So anyway, oil filter adapters. Check to make sure they're not leaking. Check and make sure your mechanic and your maintenance folks check those. There's ADs out there on some of them. NTSB is wanting there to be a revision of the AD, and so they came out with this advisory warning people about this issue to see if you're able to keep that from leaking. Because as we know, when the oil leaves the engine, bad things happen. You can't operate an engine very long without oil in it. And so again, check and make sure that your oil filter adapter is working properly. So stimulus money. If you haven't received your stimulus check version 2, you probably will pretty soon, but that also means that part of that package, that stimulus package, was some more money for FAA Airports Division. And so look for some potential more money to come to Alaska to help out our airports. Waiting to hear and see what some of those improvements may be with some of that next round of funding. But pretty exciting stuff to be able to have access to those COVID-related stimulus funds, and how that may affect us here in Alaska with some improvements to airports. One of the other things that happened in D.C. recently was the appropriations bill that was all tied with the DOD and all that stuff. It was initially was not signed into law, but then it was vetoed, but then they were able to override that veto, Congress was, and included with that was a provision, actually a mandate, that there be some real-time special use airspace notifications for pilots. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet. Talked with some folks in DC, talked with folks within the FAA, talked with folks within the military. We're not really sure what that means just yet, but we all agree that we would like to have real-time special use airspace information in the cockpit. Usually you can get pretty timely information by talking to flight service or to center, and here in Alaska it'd be Anchorage Center, to be able to get that information pretty quick. We also have Allison Range Control here north of the Alaska Range and now south of the Alaska Range to be able to get real-time status on some of our special use airspace here in Alaska. But there is a need to make sure that that information is quickly and accurately and readily available to us in the cockpit. So again, not sure what that's really going to look like. It could come in the form of ADS-B. It could come in the form of radio broadcast. There's some ideas floating around out there. Nothing has been determined as for what the final version of that's going to look like. But it is encouraging to know that that was included in the appropriations bill and Congress got that passed. Kind of curious to know what your idea of what special use airspace real-time notification might look like and what you would like to see with that. I'm sure we're going to have some opportunities to participate in that conversation, and I need you as our members to let me know. I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I readily admit I don't know everything, and while I am a very active pilot, I don't fly all the same types of aircraft and in the same types of ways, in the same types of airspace as everyone else. So help me understand what it is you would like to see and how you would like to have that information delivered to you in the cockpit. And I will definitely add that to our wish list, our ask for that piece. Speaking of information and wanting to know your take on things, right now, State DOT is in the process of some master plan updates at some airports, specifically Big Lake, there in the Mat-Su Valley. They have extended the comment period, just checking my notes, until January 25th. So you've got a few more days to enter in your comments for the Big Lake Airport Master Plan. If you use the Big Lake Airport, if you fly within the Mat-Su Valley, you want to figure out what they're talking about there. And if you just search Big Lake Airport Master Plan on your search engine, most likely you will be directed to be able to see that master plan and review it and go over it. And if you have some ideas, please submit public comments. Please let me know what your public comments are, because here again, that way I can make sure we're integrating that into our advocacy efforts on your behalf. Big Lake is not the only one. Valdez is in the middle of a master plan study right now. There's some talk about runway widths and other things happening there at Valdez. Cordova, just down the beach a ways. The Mudhole Smith Airport is being, there's actually a meeting Thursday night, 5 to 7 o'clock Alaska time, that is going to be kind of a informational meeting that's happening about Cordova. So if you are interested in any of those, please get in touch with me and I'll be glad to send you the links, give you some information on how you can participate in that master plan process, and love to have a conversation with you and find out what it is that you would like for us to be advocating for. So I got a very good email actually yesterday afternoon, this morning. My insurance is up for renewal, and was able to get my quote and was pleasantly surprised. It did go up, but not near as much as I thought it would. And so I'm getting a lot of response from members out there that are talking about their aircraft insurance and the increases that are happening there. And that is a system-wide, nationwide, actually global issue right now, and it is not going to go away in the near future. One of the things that you can do that will help keep your insurance rates down is to take some online courses, do some recurrent training, document flying with a flight instructor. I know that's a little difficult these days with COVID, but document those things and make sure your broker is aware that you are doing those things. What better time than here in the winter to do some online training? Actually, I'm looking to do an engine management course with a good friend of mine here in Nenana this winter, so we can figure out some better ways to fly behind a new engine that's actually being put on our 206 right now. You can kind of see that the hangar's a little empty right now. So one of the things I'm going to do this winter is take an engine management course from the folks down at GAMI, and so I encourage you to do those types of things as well, as your insurance most likely will go up if it hasn't already, just because that's what's happening across the whole industry. Going back to airports, I do see a question there. Do you know anything about replacing the runway at Seward? I do know that that's an ongoing thing. I've been talking with DOT off and on for a couple of years now. I'm not sure of the exact status of that project at this point. I do know there's been some back and forth as to which runway they are going to rehab, which runway they're going to shorten and do all kinds of things with. But I will see if I can't get some more current information for folks and then post it there on social media for you. Speaking of current information, the state legislative session down in Juneau. Interesting things happening in Juneau. The leadership, it's been hard for them to pick out some leadership in Juneau. As you remember, last year they did not have leadership as they went into session, and so that was a little troubling. Then COVID hit and they couldn't finish some of the things they had started. If you're not aware, the way Alaska works, if a bill is introduced, it is alive for 2 years, and then it has to be reintroduced if it's not passed. And so there's a lot of new bills that are being introduced, a lot of bills that are being reintroduced because it didn't get taken up in the 2 years that they were first introduced. So they're going back through that process again. I'm reading through those, trying to figure out if there's anything what we can do on your behalf. And you're absolutely right, Tim. That was the train going by the airport here in Nenana. You probably heard that on the audio there. So speaking of hearing things, we may hear some CH-47s come over this evening. The military has been down doing some of their recurrent training. Speaking of recurrent training, it's nice to see those fellas and gals out flying around at night in Chinooks. That's a pretty awesome sight. So we may hear those thundering over the hangar here before I'm done, but we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, back to the legislative session. There's talk of trying to form a caucus so they can form a majority, but a bipartisan caucus. Some Republicans are talking about going to the Democratic side to be able to form a caucus so they can form some leadership there. A lot of opinions as to that option. Some folks are not happy at all about that. Other folks think it may be a good idea, and we'll have to wait and see. I think forming a leadership team and getting that established before the session starts is going to be a good thing. We saw what happened last year, and it was painful actually to watch what's going on there. So speaking of government, the events in Washington D.C. last week were well, it was unfortunate to see some of the things that happened last week and the way that has turned out. And as a result of that, there's been several resignations of very high-level officials in Washington, D.C. Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao has resigned. Since she was an appointee of Trump, she was most likely was going to vacate that position with the new administration. She may be reaffirmed at that point, but she didn't wait that long. She went ahead and resigned. Secretary Chao had come to Alaska several times and understood the things that we were dealing with here in Alaska. It was very instrumental in helping Alaska get some funding and some other things that has helped us. But she has resigned. Several other high-level FAA headquarters level folks have resigned that were political positions. That is not affecting the day-to-day operations of the FAA in any significant way, I don't think. Folks within the FAA may have a different opinion of that, but things are still happening within the FAA on that level. So that was pretty much what I had on my list to talk about, except for I wanted to talk about some lessons that I learned within the past month of my experience of flying R206 to the lower 48. And with that, Tim, I'll answer your question about are the lights working on the ski strip? And so a little local knowledge here. Nenana is a municipal airport, which is an oddity here in Alaska. Most airports in Alaska are state-owned and sponsored, but here in Nenana, it is a municipally sponsored airport. And our small community of about 350 people has had a hard time financially, to be honest with you, maintaining our airport. I will say that it is very exciting that we now have runway lights working again. And Tim, to directly answer your question, I think there are 3 lights on the ski strip that are presently working today. One on the 4 right approach in, and then 2 on the 2-2 right approach in. So they're on the ends, which is nice to be able to see the ends of those. So that's enough of the local update there. So I took our 206 to the lower 48 to get an engine change, a prop upgrade, some avionics upgrades, engine instrumentation upgrades. And so to do that, I had to fly it down there. And just a short explanation of why I took it to the lower 48. We have very competent, very capable shops here in Alaska and very competitive shops when it comes to prices. But I could not find a shop, even talking and dealing with friends, that was able to do the scope of the project all at the same time, all at the same shop, without having to bounce around the multiple shops. And so I've got some great friends in Spokane, and they are able to do all of that project in their shop. And so I needed to get it down there. Waiting on the weather this time of year to fly through Southeast Alaska. Anybody that's been in Alaska for any length of time will tell you that flying through Southeast and having good VFR weather is difficult any time of the year. In December, it's very difficult. So I was watching the weather windows, had everything packed up and ready to go, and it was literally waking up every morning and saying, is the weather good enough to go today? Nope, okay, go off and do other things. So we finally had a window open up. Daniel Richardson, a great friend of mine, who got his pilot's license this summer, was my co-pilot on that trip, and that was a very good choice. As one of the lessons that I learned, it was a good thing to have him with me, because it was a great experience for him to further his flight training. It was very helpful for me to have a co-pilot who was very good at reading the chart, could help dial in the frequencies, that could do some radio work for me, because we actually flew an IFR several times. Picked up a clearance to get into Ketchikan, had to shoot an approach into Spokane, pretty dicey with ice in the vicinity, none of it reported at the airport, but at night in rising mountainous terrain and a totally unfamiliar area and all these things, having someone sitting next to me that was able to help me with some of those roles and tasks in the cockpit allowed me to stay focused and keep my situational awareness. So lesson learned, he will be flying back up with me to bring the airplane home, because it was great to have his help. The other thing that I realized pretty quick, how much I rely on the weather camera program here in Alaska, and how fortunate we are to have that weather program, weather cameras. Down through Southeast, it was great to be able to just pull up the cameras and see what was going on. Our first fuel stop was in Yakutat, and it was because of the weather cameras that we decided to launch, because the METAR had it low IFR with freezing fog. Well, when you looked at the weather camera, you could tell that what it was mist and fog rising up off of the wet, frozen pavement on the ramp area that was influencing the ASOS, an AWOS machine. So So we were able to make that trip based off of the camera and what it showed us. What I realized when we got to Bellingham, trying to get across the Cascades to Spokane and not having weather cameras, very hard for me to make a go, no-go decision comfortably without having access to weather cameras. So I've been spoiled by weather cameras. So Walter Combs and his team, I want to say thank you publicly and very vocally here on social media. Thank you, Walter, and your team for the weather camera program here in Alaska and its expansion there in the lower 48 in some areas. I was able to look at DOT cameras from Washington State and look at road conditions and kind of get a picture of what the sky may be doing. But to be honest with you, none of them were actually good enough to make a go, no-go decision for flying. 16.4 hours total time to fly from Nenana to Spokane. If it was a direct straight shot, ForeFlight says it's about a 13.5-hour flight. So we actually did pretty good, only adding 3 hours to what a direct nonstop no wind flight would have been. We spent the night in Ketchikan. We cleared Canadian border services in Prince Rupert and then cleared U.S. Customs back in Bellingham. Another lesson that I learned that I knew a little bit about, but I have flown up and down the Alaska Highway a few times, not flown a lot in Southeast, but enough and aware of all the things because, one of my jobs, being government affairs, is to kind of keep up on a lot of things that are happening. And so getting those special procedures in and out of Ketchikan, reviewing those beforehand helped a lot. Knowing the procedures to call Prince Rupert and get things cleared should not have been a problem. But because of COVID, and I think that's a phrase we use a lot these days, but because of COVID, it was different. It was not the way that it was published on the internet. Even talking to some border services folks in Canada, the folks I talked to were not aware of some of the local things that happened there at Prince Rupert. Canadian Border Services is headquartered at the docks in Prince Rupert, and if I was operating on floats, it would not have been a problem. And so talking with them, they had to figure out how to get over to the island to be able to clear me because it was a Saturday and all those things. And the only reason why they were even willing to entertain the concept of coming over and doing that is because it was technically, it met the classifications of an essential flight. And so the question there from Rick is Canadian Customs allowing GA flights now? It is still on an essential only basis. One of the things that I learned that helped a tremendous amount in my interactions with the Canadian Border Services was that I went to Ketchikan, cleared at Prince Rupert, and told them that I only needed to stop in Port Hardy for fuel, that I had no intentions or plans to leave the airport, was not going to interact with the public, that we were going to fill the tanks, check the oil, and drain the bladder, and my bladder. And my co-pilot was going to drain his bladder. And that was the only thing we planned to do while we were in Canada. And because of that very limited interaction, they were willing to allow us to clear and to make that flight. They did ask, could we make that nonstop? And in better weather conditions, we probably could have made that hop from Ketchikan to Bellingham nonstop. But we had some winds that were not acting as forecasted. And so I did not want to take that chance or that risk, and so that's why we chose to clear in Prince Rupert with a planned fuel stop in Port Hardy. So again, hats off and kudos to the Canadian Border Services. As always, the Canadians are very polite, very helpful, but there was an interesting comment that was made by one of the border agents. She was going through checking off all the questionnaires that they have to ask you as you come in, and then stopped and asked us and said, you do know there's a global pandemic right now. And yes, I am aware of that. And so again, the only reason why we were allowed to go through is because we had planned for very limited interaction with folks in Canada, and because of the purpose of the trip was not recreational. It was not for holiday. It was meeting all the the categories for an essential activity. So that's why we were allowed to enter. I will say that dealing with U.S. Customs and Border Services, Border Patrol, I understand those fellas and gals have a very difficult job, and they are very serious about doing their job, and I appreciate their integrity and their wanting to do their job well. That sometimes translates in being short and gruff and even to the point of making you feel like you're a criminal. But my interactions with them were very positive. They were very helpful. I was able to explain our situation. I called them in Port Hardy and explained that because we have some winds that are potentially going to impact my ability to plan my arrival time within that 30-minute window that they asked for. Asked them what is the latest time they would accept someone to clear customs, even though their office closed at 8 o'clock. They stopped accepting folks at 7:30, which was important for me to know. That was not published anywhere. They say they're open until 8. That doesn't mean you can show up at 7:59 and be able to clear customs. So check that if you decide to fly through at any point in the future. Explained to them my situation. They made a recommendation that I clear at Boeing Field instead of Bellingham. I told them that was a very hard thing for me to do because of range of the aircraft and because of unforecasted winds. I may not have the ability to make it all the way to Boeing Field without cutting into my fuel reserves. And so we had a conversation about that on the phone. And in the end, they finally says, okay, if you can get here by 7:30, we will clear you. And we're not going to worry about the 30-minute window because I had called them and made prior arrangements and explained my situation to them. And they were very accommodating once they understood the situation. They did ask if they were able to follow my progress on FlightAware. And because the aircraft is ADS-B equipped, they were able to do that. And that gave them a better peace of mind about allowing me to not hit that 30-minute window. So again, communication, we all know that communication smooths over a lot of things when we deal with authorities. And so to their credit, they were very good once we got there. Asked all the standard questions. They went through all of our paperwork, and we were able to clear there. We had to stay in Bellingham for a couple days because of weather. And I tell you that being in Alaska for 25 plus years and only visiting the lower 48, it's different, especially in these times of COVID. Trying to, being weathered in. I've been weathered in a lot worse places. I've had to sleep in airplanes overnight in some pretty nasty and foul weather. Stayed in villages, not because of being weathered in, but just because of my other roles. Traveling places, we were prepared to camp at any time. And being stuck in Bellingham, where we had a hotel right across the street from the airport, with restaurants, and it was great. It worked out really good. But to shorten the story a little bit, in order for us to get to Spokane from Bellingham, we couldn't fly direct. We tried one day to get up and get high and go over. That wasn't going to work, so we came back. We finally wound up going across Puget Sound, going down the west side of Puget Sound, going all the way down to Portland, and then flying up the Columbia River Gorge, and then coming into Spokane that direction. That was the longest leg of the entire trip, actually. We did that nonstop. 4.3 hours, I think, is what that leg wound up being. Had incredible tailwinds going through the gorge, and was able to land well with more than 45. It was actually over an hour's fuel reserve in Spokane. But I will tell you, one of the lessons that I learned, I'm an instrument-rated pilot. I try to stay proficient. I'm always making sure that I'm current, but we all understand there's a big difference between currency and proficiency. And so leading up to this trip, I had done some practice approaches and got to where I felt a lot more comfortable. But after almost 4.5 hours of flying and marginal weather in airspace that was unfamiliar to me, and part of the country that I had very little experience with flying around in, To say that I was mentally on my game at the end of the day, not so much. And having Daniel there beside me, verifying my position, verifying I had frequencies tuned in correctly, making sure everything was ready for me for the next step. Very helpful to have his help as a co-pilot. And we all know that after a long day flying an approach down to close to minimums at night at an unfamiliar airport with rising terrain surrounding the entire area, and when you pop out and you see the runway lights in front of you, there are very few sights in the world that compare to that. So that was a very, very good end to a very, very, very long day, and so we were able to make it in there. So I tell you that long, long story to let you know that that I learned several things that I thought I knew. I verified some things that I was suspect of, and now have a personal experience to relay to folks when they call and ask about flying up to Alaska. I will tell you that that because of COVID and because of the health orders in Alaska, we may or may not be able to have life as normal this year. So if you're interested in flying to Alaska in your own aircraft, give me a call, reach out to me. Would love to help you figure out some of those logistics, be able to tell you some things to look out for, to be careful of and aware of. And logistically speaking, there's a lot of things to consider. Again, flying that route in December, survival gear. It was a good thing we were flying in a 206. There was just two of us, but we took off. It was colder than 20 below 0 Fahrenheit when we left Nenana. The warmest it got was in the mid-60s. We flew over Arctic mountainous terrain. We flew over marine environments. We flew over the high desert. And so carrying all that different type of survival gear, like I said, it was a good thing we were in a 206, to be honest with you, to be able to carry all that gear with us. So a lot of things to consider. And again, my hat's off to Customs and Border Protection here in the United States. They are very good at their job. They are very accommodating. But if you try to lie to them, if you try to deceive them, if they find out that you don't have your act together, you're going to have problems. One of the things that helped me in my interactions both with Canada and the U.S. is I had all of my documents in one folder. When they asked to see them, I handed them to them. They were all in order. They were all there. The fact that I had a restricted radio telephone operator's permit from the FCC was impressive to Customs and Border Protection. They say that most people don't bother to get that. Had the international radio station license for the aircraft in there. That went great. The one thing that I had problems with is I could not get a customs stamp before we went. And that was because of being so close to the end of the year. The website would not allow me to complete the transaction. That gave us a little bit of a hassle right there in Bellingham, but we were able to clear it. I did show them the receipt for my purchase of the 2021 tax custom sticker, although I knew that wasn't going to help me in 2020, but it showed them that I was serious and I was trying to be compliant with the law, and they accepted that as a good faith effort to actually do what I had to get done. So anyway, the Canadians, as always, are very nice, very friendly, and very accommodating. They were very quick to remind us that because of the global pandemic, that if we were to travel outside of the areas that we told them we were going, or if we were to be the cause of an outbreak of COVID, that potentially we could be imprisoned for 3 years and face $1 million fine. They're serious, folks. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why they are serious is because Americans have lied to them when they came into their country. They tried to deceive them about their intentions when they got there. They tried to tell them stories that would be considered essential when in fact all they were there was for a holiday and for a vacation. So please don't do that. It makes it difficult for folks that have legitimate reasons for traveling. Hopefully things will open up by the summer and we can get back to life as normal. But until then, we just got to be careful what we're doing. So that's all I had on my list, and it's been kind of a long update tonight, but I wanted to kind of give you that story about my trip down to the lower 48 and R206, so that if you have plans to do that, or if you're curious about what COVID has done to the ability to do that, that's an update on some of those things. So any questions from anyone? I'm seeing a lot of folks popping up, and a lot of interactions there on Instagram and on Facebook as well, but I'm not seeing any specific questions that I could help answer anything. Again, we try to do this at least once a month, and if conditions warrant, we may update a little bit more frequently. You see I'm wearing another Hawaiian shirt. That was kind of something that got started back when COVID broke out and everybody was being, had to stay home and all those things. So apparently I have started something that folks don't want me to stop. So I will keep wearing Hawaiian shirts while we do these. Just a couple of other housekeeping items. If you're not aware, the Alaska Airmen's Association is building another Cub to raffle off this year. If you like to follow some of those things, those videos are archived on our YouTube channel. And there's another update coming this week, and it'll be live on both Instagram and Facebook. And it's an incredible airplane. The folks at Acme Cub are doing a great job, and it's been exciting to see their progress and what they're doing to that airplane. It makes me a little disappointed again this year that I'm an employee of the Airmen's Association and I am ineligible to win. So I need one of you good friends out there to win that airplane and let me fly it, because I'd love to be able to fly that airplane around. Tickets are on sale now. I encourage you to call the Airmen's office and purchase your tickets there. If there is, some of you may be in the Anchorage area, there's some kiosks around Anchorage to be able to buy those tickets. So I do see a question that just popped up. Art asked, did you file over the phone or with ForeFlight or some other? So actually I did all those, actually. Here in Alaska, I filed over the phone. I talked to good friends at the Fairbanks Flight Service Station and got my briefing there and filed my flight plan there. When we got to Yakutat, closed over the radio, and Yakutat filed again on the radio once we departed Yakutat. Got to Ketchikan, closed out on the radio, but then talking over the phone to the folks in Canada, trying to get all that going away. And of course, you have to be on a flight plan in Canada and crossing into Canada. So that went well. The Canadians, again, very helpful. Told them what I was trying to do and that it had been a couple of years since I had done this in Canada and wasn't exactly sure what I needed to ask for. And so that fella did a great job of explaining the briefing to me, gave me a lot of information, and kind of held my hand as we went through that whole process. Once we got into the lower 48, I do use ForeFlight, and I do self-brief an awful lot. That is my habit here, because most of the places that I go, there is no weather reporting, and so I'm looking at a lot of different sites to interpolate the weather in the areas that I fly when I go off airport. So when I got to the lower 48, it was hard to switch mindsets. I did file once via ForeFlight, the app, and then other times I just used the radio and called Leidos on the phone. I will say that I, again, learned to appreciate the Alaska Flight Service folks. And I see a comment there on Instagram where they agree. Alaska Flight Service is the best. I tell you, I really appreciate that personal service that we get from Alaska Flight Service, and that local knowledge that happens because we're talking to folks here in Alaska. So yeah, good stuff there. So back to the raffle plane. Yeah, so make sure you buy your tickets. They are selling pretty quick, and surprisingly, ticket sales are going very, very well compared to what we thought they may have been doing because of COVID. But yes, ticket sales are going great. Encourage you not to wait. As you know, tickets have sold out before the trade show the past several years, and you don't want to miss out on your chance to have a really nice Cub. Speaking of the trade show, Alaska Airmen's Association is working our hardest to figure out the best way to hold the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering this year. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. We do have some benchmark dates on the calendar that we need to have certain things determined and set in stone before we can progress to the next level. And we are working on those things, and there's lots of options on the table right now. Not just the traditional in-person at the FedEx hangar, but talking about having it at another location a little bit later in the summer that would give us an opportunity to be outside and a little more socially distant ability there. Even all the way down to a virtual event, which I really don't want to do, and I don't think anybody else does either. But to do the best job that we can, we've got to put all those things on the table, and we've got to look at them all, and we've got to sort through all the pros and the cons of all of those. And unfortunately, it's just uncertain. The uncertainty of what's going to happen this summer is a pretty heavy thing with that. So we're working on it. We will keep you in the loop when we know more. And our goal and our hope is to have an in-person event, but can't promise that right now. And I think you all understand. All right. One last call for questions before we sign off. Thanks for joining. Thanks for participating. It's exciting to see the interactions that happen both here live and then after the fact. My email probably is the best way to get in touch with me. You can go to alaskaairmen.org and find all the contact information there. My email address is listed on the website. My personal cell phone number is listed there, so feel free to call me and answer or ask me some questions. And again, I will remind you that I very liberally use the do not disturb function on my phone because it is out there for the whole world. So just because I don't answer doesn't mean that I don't care. I will get back in touch with you, I promise. So my email address, adam.white@alaskaairmen.org. And until next time, we'll see you later. Good night.